I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Amal Graafstra, book author, TEDx speaker, and CEO of the biohacking companies Dangerous Things and VivoKey Technologies. Amal has various RFID and NFC implants in his body that open doors, start vehicles, unlocks his smart gun, and log into computers for him. Prior to his current roles, Amal's experience include numerous executive IT-related roles at firms including Walletmore, Everfind, the medical biotech company Morpheus, Atomic Mobile, Silicon Energy, and more. He joins us today to discuss the intersection of information technology and medicine, with a focus on the intersection of biology and technology, the evolution of our relationship with machines. So Amal, welcome back. It is truly a pleasure. I am so excited to have you with me today.
Cool. Yeah, let's get into it.
Well, let's start with Neuralink. Okay, they just implanted their first patient with a brain implant containing 64 flexible polymer threads, providing 1024 sites for recording brain activity, which allows the patient to control a computer mouse simply by thinking. So I wanted to start with your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so it is quite a milestone. They're not the first, of course. There's been brain implants for a very long time using like arrays and things, but the idea that this could be a permanent device. So not a lot of people realize that back in the old days or whatever, when they would do nerve interfaces, they're just like spiked arrays, and you jam that into the tissue, and it works, but it only works for a time because your tissue is gelatinous, right? And it moves and it grows. And so you would set up your arrays to try to figure out what kind of brain cell activity am I able to record here? Can I induce activity in those cells? But very quickly, in the matter of a few weeks, the cells will move around, scar tissue will form. The signals that you had then don't work now, and so it's very difficult. But yeah, the two kind of front runners in this space, Neuralink and Synchron, they're doing an amazing job because the way that they're approaching this, you can expect that those devices are permanently implanted. So that gives rise to applications that that wouldn't be really possible with previous technology. So moving a mouse, being able to communicate at all is fascinating, and it's a huge leap from where we were, but it's also quite crude, right? It's the first thing that we can point at and say, look, we've gotten the first rung of the ladder here.
Well, and I appreciate you mentioning Synchron. I'll come back to them in a moment. But so from what I've read, the implant was done by a surgical robot, which is hoped to pave the way for mass adoption of this technology for the treatment of conditions like they've mentioned obesity, autism, depression, and schizophrenia, at least to begin with. And this comes on the heels of a story about a man with Lou Gehrig's disease who was the 10th person to receive a Synchron brain implant that allows him to send health notifications and pain reports to medical providers using his mind. So again, this goes to what you were saying about they're not the first, right? But apparently this surgical robot, I guess, is something that could mass produce implants.
Yeah, so, well, it doesn't produce them, but what it does do is when you're placing threads right into the brain, your biggest issue, and again, the issue with like the arrays and things, is that it's just spikes and you ram this into the tissue and it creates tears, bleeds, your body has to react. The whole point of the surgical robot is that it can identify places in brain tissue to be able to thread that thread, into the brain matter without causing a bleed, without hitting a blood vessel, basically working it in between the capillaries and things that are supplying your brain with oxygen. And by doing that, there is no reaction. The body doesn't realize they're there. There's no scar tissue formed. And it's really the only way to make this approach that Neuralink is taking, make it a permanent implant or something that doesn't reject or change or become useless over time. Synchron is taking a different approach. They're not going through the brain at all. They're going up through blood vessels, and they have a stent, right? So it goes into the blood vessel that's in the brain. It blows up like a stent, and it has all the sensor arrays around that perimeter. And so by being very close to the wall of the blood vessel, and the brain cell, the neuron is right there. They can pick up the activity through the thin wall of the blood vessel without any actual interaction with brain matter, brain material. So the two approaches are really great. The surgical robot feels a little scarier because it's like a robot that's poking in your brain. But we do all kinds of surgeries now with robots, eye surgeries, things like that, lasers that use robots. Basically, a computer was going to evaluate where to shoot that laser into your eyeball to change the shape of it. So we're trusting this kind of thing, this medical or surgical robots in many other areas. So it's not really crazy, but I think when it comes to the claims, when we're talking about treating like autism, schizophrenia, things like that, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a hyperbolic claim because we don't even really know how those things work yet today. Like we're saying we're going to solve, X, but we don't really know how X works. But we're going to solve it, right? It just seems a bit, a bit of a too
maybe a little bit
it's a wild claim.
premature.
Yeah, it's premature, and but at the same time, you gotta, there's all this discussion going on because I had a chance to talk to Tom, CEO of Synchron, a while back at an event, and it's not just him, but all these companies that are bringing these kind of devices that have medical uses, but they also have augmentative uses. They really, really don't want to talk about the augmentative uses. They want to focus on the medical use because who's going to argue with that? Who's going to say, well, we shouldn't help these people, right? But at the same time, the exciting cusp of this is that while, yes, we could improve the lives of people with these conditions, we could also improve the lives of people without any conditions. And that's where I'm very, very interested in the human augmentation aspect of these technologies.
Well, and that brings me to your implants. Again, you are on the leading edge of this. And in terms of mind-blowing stuff, you actually have RFID and NFC implants in your body right now. And you've tailored those so that they do specialized things in your life. Can you tell me a little bit about your implants?
Yeah.
And I guess I should ask you to tell us a little bit about your companies, too, so that people can learn more about those.
Well, let's start with we'll kind of go through the chronology, and that'll cover it. So in 2005, I was working at Morpheus, at my company Morpheus, doing consulting and basically managed services for medical clinics and things. And so I was going in and out of this door and quite frequently, and it was an automatic locking, emergency door, really. And I just got really, really frustrated with it. And I'm like, I need this door to just know that it's me and let me in and not have to fiddle with the keys and stuff. And so I I looked at biometrics and stuff, but it was terrible back then. It's kind of still terrible now. And high cost, high management, all that. But cards, the RFID badges, beep beep, those were great and robust and cheap. And so I was like, I want that, but I don't. The card is not going to solve my problem. I want something that works like that, but it's gonna just know that it's me. So I looked at pets. Like pets are getting these chip identifiers, put in. That's just normal. And I was like, well, why not? Why couldn't I just use that? So I called around, found a company that made them for pets, and for technical reasons, I didn't want a pet chip specifically. I got the same kind of material and construction, but with a different chip inside to interact with cheaper readers that were available. And so I just made my own access control system that read the chip and I was beeped my way into the door. It was great. I just walk up and kind of, tap my hand and grab the handle and go and went in. And then, people saw that. And then one of my friends took a picture and some videos and stuff, and that got on a blog. And then I kind of, got some media coverage and then wrote a book, RFID Toys, for Wiley Publishing in 2007. Because RFID was just becoming accessible to hobbyists, right? And so just kind of it kept rolling, and I kept waiting for that momentum to die down, doing other things, other companies, exploring new things. But by 2013, it was just very obvious that there was enough interest that it just began to overwhelm my inbox. And so I started a company, Dangerous Things. A little tongue-in-cheek, just I figured I could call it Safe Things, but that wouldn't convince anybody anyway, so I'll just call it Dangerous Things. And then, only people who really kind of understand that they're literally taking on the bleeding edge here would even consider it. So started the company, and then very quickly did a crowdfunding campaign for the world's first NFC compatible implant. And so, did that and then got a huge 4x response over the ask. And so I was like, okay, well, this is a thing, I guess. And so then we just kept going. But by 2018, it was clear that we needed applications that were beyond the basic, tap the badge on the door kind of what I call personal scope application. So my door, my car, my computer. I want to talk about like logging into websites, getting bank accounts, identifying myself for travel, like those kind of bigger applications, broader scope. And so I launched a company, VivoKey Technologies, to do that, to bring secure security features to the implantables, and also to kind of rebrand that approach for the broader scope, because banks are not going to be like, yeah, I'll get a dangerous things implant. It's not going to fly. So VivoKey, we focused on doing that, and during that time, over that period of time, technologies like FIDO security keys, we're calling them passkeys now, but it's FIDO compliant security keys became a thing. So now all of my accounts that are possible to secure with FIDO security keys. I secure them with an implant. So I've one on each wrist here, ding ding, and so I just log into your account. Yep, I just tap my wrist on the reader here on my desk or on my phone, and I'm in. And that's a cryptographically secure login, no more passwords. So doing things like that is what VivoKey is focused on. And then we want to talk to governments and get into EHR medical records, portable medical records, patient identity, things that are silently a problem. And I mean, like, it's silent because patient identity, just simply identifying yourself properly, particularly in an emergency situation, but even just walking in the front door of the clinic. 7 to 10% of patients have multiple records, even at a single clinic. And that's a problem because record 1 might have this medication that you're taking, and record 2 might have this other medication. And it's why every single time you go to the clinic, they confirm, are these all your medications you're taking? Because those duplicate records do exist, and there might be contraindications. And if you have one medication that's bad to take with another, but they're on 2 different records, they won't know that, and then you'll get prescribed something that could be lethal. So that's one big problem. Another big problem is just patient identity in general for surgeries, things like that. Is this the right guy? Are we cutting the right leg off or the left leg? So just kind of reducing all those possibilities down to something that's more than just your name and your birthday when you go into the clinic is kind of one of those goals. So a lot of applications.
Well, and one of the things that we've talked about in past interviews is the fact that this is the most secure way to protect your identity, right? I mean, phones can be stolen, smart rings can be stolen, watches, things like that. Fingerprints
or just
can
lost.
be copied. Yeah.
Lost or forgotten. So there is the hacker, the active, like trying to compromise your account, but more likely is just the loss. Like you forgot that incredibly important token, and you see this increasingly in work environments. So you forget your badge, you forget your security key for your laptop or your workstation at work. That's a whole day of productivity gone. Have a full-time employee at the company to handle that situation, get you a temporary login, whatever they need to do, or you just need to go home. Like there's some environments that are just require security, so they don't offer a workaround. So just loss of tokens, managing the tokens, all these identifiers of you to these different systems. We really want to try to collapse those down into just you. And I really want to make you the bastion of your own identity, both physical, biological, but also digital, to kind of abdicate that authority to your phone or to your laptop or to a thing that's on your keychain. It just doesn't feel right to me. So I want me to be the most important thing. And if my phone breaks or I lose it or gets stolen, I want to be able to pick up any phone and continue to interact digitally, online, or even physically, getting to my house, that kind of thing, without any need for another device that I need to manage.
Well, I want to get into the psychology of this briefly. And part of that is based on past audience feedback. I've had a wide variety of responses. Some folks are like, yes, this is amazing. Let's go for it. I want to see this go mainstream. Other people are saying, you know what, I feel really uncomfortable about putting anything foreign into my body like that. And for me, I look at that and I'm like, you know what, there's a psychological barrier here. It's
Hmm.
something that I've thought about. And so I have a short list of artificial augmentations and body modifications, including braces, glasses, artificial hips, pacemakers, IUDs, tattoos, makeup and lipstick, circumcision, vaccinations, tonsil or appendix removals, hormone replacement therapy, and plastic surgery. These are just, again, this is just what came to mind as examples of body modification or augmentation that we already do in society, but we don't consider these to be artificial because we've normalized to them, right?
Yes, and the other thing that's important, there's two other aspects here. The first aspect is application, right? Is it
Yeah.
compelling? Is the application compelling? Replacing a faulty hip, that's compelling. You want to walk, right? Getting a tooth filling, very compelling. You wouldn't get a drill put in your face for any other reason, but you want to be able to chew food, right? Like
Yeah.
get rid of the pain. Like there are compelling applications. And so for a lot of people, they may not feel that the applications are compelling. They might not have had a security incident in the past. They might not care about securing an account that they really could throw away if it got compromised. So there's a lot of potential reasons that they just won't care enough to bother, right? Some people don't care enough to get an ear piercing even. Like they're just like, I never really cared about it, right? So they just don't, or they don't get a tattoo because it's not compelling. But the other side of that is um, just an awareness of how the technology works, because there has been a flood of kind of misinformation that has just been pushed at the general public, and really that's the only education that they get about this
Mm.
technology. Is every movie you see that has a microchip implant involved, every television show, every joke that's made on a radio show, or even in television, they might offhand like, haha, you're tracking them with a chip, or all of those things are always negative for the person with the implant. They're
Yeah.
being tracked, they're remotely being killed, right? They've got a missile fired at them because it's tracking the implant. All these things are all about how to get rid of that chip, or it's a bad thing. And so when you don't have any other real world, real examples of the benefits, um, there's a real lack of trust that's created. So not knowing how the technology works, you know, not really not really thinking that companies or governments have your best interest. That's very American. On the other side of the pond,
Yeah.
there's not as much mistrust of the government anyway, like agencies that are trying to help society. You know, here we have problems with trust, and so, yeah, all that stuff together, that raises the bar significantly for the compelling application. People still will do terrible things that they're aware that there are terrible things to their body for the application if it's compelling enough. A breast augmentation is one of those things. It is horrific on the body. It's kind of facial surgery is horrific, nose jobs, all that kind of whatever. Very, very impactful and stressful to the body, with risk, real risk, like lethal risk. But the application's compelling enough, they're like, I'm going to do it. So, that's really the two things: the unawareness of the technology, mistrust of technology companies, governments, and then the lack of a compelling application. But the thing that I really want to point out is that our entire approach here is to decouple you from those companies and effectively from the government as well. But when you get an implant, there's no like the way that it works is just like the implant in your pet. It doesn't have a battery, there's no charging it, it doesn't broadcast, it's not online. It's just there dormant. And when you need to use it, you bring it up to a reader to do that application. And very much so that implant, Vivo Key implants, Dangerous Things implants, they are your property. They're part of you if you put them in your body, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You control what they do, what goes on them, how they work, that kind of thing. So it's not like a phone, right? So if you get an Android or an iPhone, you are tied in to those companies. There's no
Yeah.
real way to use that phone without those companies in existence. Um, not at all. Like so, and then you're tied into the phone company. They have the SIM card or whatever. Like there's so many ropes and threads that tie you and your digital identity that that phone wants to own. It wants you to put your wallet, your keys, your driver's license, your everything about you, your digital keys, your pass keys, everything they want in that phone. They want you entirely to be owned by that phone and in proxy by those companies. And so, I really don't like that. I really don't like that idea. I like the idea that I have my identity here inside of me all the time, and I can use the phone. I can use the phone as an interface. I can use the phone to log into things and to, have connectivity and, all that stuff. But that phone and that account on the phone is not my critical identity. I can throw that phone away, pick up any other phone, even if I borrow a phone from somebody else. And now I can interact with my websites because all that stuff's here. It's not in my phone. I don't have to log into that phone that I've borrowed to get access to all my identity. It's here. And so that is compelling.
Well, and phones, I think, are a great example where, 20 years ago, smartphones were kind of a luxury novelty, right? And
Yeah.
it was for people who needed to be ultra connected. And today it's considered, I think, a necessity by most,
Yeah,
So,
you can get a smartphone from any kind of social services. Like, even if you're homeless, you literally can get a smartphone, right, with these
yeah.
features and connectivity, minimal data and minimal messaging and everything. But it is something you can get literally for free because it is seen as almost a utility, right? It's power, water. These are utilities because we see them as like critical. And smartphones in particular, and connectivity has been put into that arena, if not officially by law, at least by practice, right?
Well, so do you think today's neural implants, I mean, again, right now we're talking about moving a computer mouse, right, which is not tremendous, but for the right person with the right disability, then it is very important. As this technology matures, do you see it enabling immersive virtual experiences like we see in movies like The Matrix?
I mean, that is a possibility. I don't know that it would be a good use of it. But yes, for sure, because let's say you are having a visual issue, right? You have blindness, or there's some kind of problem with your optic nerve, and the optic part of the brain processing is back here. And if you plug into that nerve center where you can submit some visual information to the brain for processing, then yeah, you could virtualize that completely if you wanted. You could augment it. You could say, I want to be able to see in the UV spectrum. I want to be able to see the infrared spectrum.
Mm.
I want to be able to see other things, right? Like, there's a lot that could be done. And I think rather than full virtualization, I mean, which would be possible, I guess, but particularly with people that still have input from their real eyes, right? For full virtual, I'm sure that you would have to somehow you'd have to put a blinders on, right? So the only input your brain is getting is from the augmentation. But yeah, I think augmented visual aids are coming. We're trying to collapse that down already. There's contact lenses that are trying to be created and things. But I think really that augmented experience where you're able to, if you'd like, be able to overlay information, things like that. But more so just kind of augment your capabilities. I'm less interested in, I can see floating information about what's going on. I don't care. I want to see like infrared. I want to see ultraviolet. I want to see electromagnetic spectrums. Like, how strong is the Wi-Fi in here? Oh, it's really strong over there, right? Like, being able to perceive things that we just can't perceive now. That is really interesting to me.
Well, the reason I mentioned The Matrix is I want to take people beyond that. And again, you are one of the few people who can just absolutely blow minds with where these things are going. So, again, in The Matrix, humans connect to a network, to a brain implant for essentially a VR experience. But one of the things that you've suggested is that in the future, due to natural neuroplasticity, the human mind may actually spread consciousness out over the network as it begins to offload tasks for processing. And for me, that was incredibly intriguing.
Yeah. So, I mean, we know this can happen. So, in brain injury cases, you have an entire area of the brain that's been compromised or damaged or destroyed or removed. And the brain compensates. It says, oh, shoot, I need to do that. So let's move a little bit out over here and make this part do that part now. And it doesn't really do it as well as the area of the brain that was designed to do that, but it does work, and it's compensating and building itself anew, basically, to do that. So the mind of the brain, the physical process that the brain runs on, like, we'll call it the mind. The mind runs on the brain, right? The brain is the hardware. The mind is
Yeah.
the emergent property. And so, and we'll talk about emergent properties, I'm sure. But anyway, so when you give that hardware more space, because you've now linked it to digital neurons, let's call them. So you have a bridge like Neuralink, Synchron, and you have a higher density of that. Right now it's mouse cursors and things, but you got to think of it like telephone lines. Even the old school, run them on the telephone pole, pick up the phone, beep, 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 telephone lines. Like those telephone lines, it's the same copper and everything. Right now we're having phone conversations. Hello, Mr. Bell, right? Like very rudimentary, right?
Yeah.
But those same copper telephone lines bring, eventually we're bringing data and high-speed data, DSL and, broadband over those same copper lines. And so that's what we're talking about here, is the evolution of what it is we can do and the bandwidth we can do it with over those connections to neurons in the brain. And with the idea that there is some permanence, right? So these things aren't nebulous or ethereal. They are kind of rooted once we map things out and connections out. The mind will realize that there's more hardware out there to utilize, right? And so even the neurons will reconfigure themselves, and you'll see, I believe what you will end up seeing is, as we move more information over those bridges, the neurons themselves, the synapses and the dendrites and all the things that change over time, I don't know if your audience is aware, but when you have thoughts in your brain that recur, right? If a signal goes from neuron A to B many times and repeatedly, that dendrite, that connection gets stronger. It gets bigger, and that neuron starts prioritizing that because it's saying, we're learning, right? This is why having recurring bad thoughts is not great, because you're reinforcing that physically. Your brain is reconfiguring itself to reinforce that behavior. So have good thoughts and reinforce that, and you'll be good. But my point is, you're starting to see these kind of super highways in the physical biological brain, bringing information to and from those bridges to this digital space. And that digital space could be could be crazy. Who knows, right? It could be anything. You could get the Amazon Brain Expandable the service, right, or whatever. So yeah, I think that there is, depending on how things are communicated within the brain, and how those kind of action potentials are how neurons communicate, and how those are explored and mapped and provided digitally. Yeah, I think the brain will totally reconfigure itself, and then parts of your mind will have the opportunity to run on the cloud, basically. How that feels or how that works when there's connectivity issues is a little scary. I'm not sure how that would work. You might suddenly become like lobotomized if your connection drops. So if you migrate too many of those functions and features out, that might be scary. But it doesn't necessarily need to be on the cloud either. You could have a device with you. I mean, we already have our phones with us at all times, and we kind of prioritize those devices over even our wallets. So if you ask somebody if they'd rather lose their wallet or their phone, they're like, I don't care, take my wallet. Don't take my phone, right? So you could imagine that there could be something similar where you have your kind of digital neural space. But it is, in my opinion, it'd be better if it was something that you had and controlled and contained and had with you at all times to help augment your cognition.
Well, so I want to jump from the Matrix to the Borg, right? Because it's just one science fiction
Sure.
trope to another. In
Yeah.
the Matrix, right, the brain is either here or here, but it's discretely in one place. But then this idea with spreading your consciousness out is you start to form like a hive mind, right? And when I thought about that, I was like, what's the best example for that? I thought the Borg, right, where they are potentially individuals, but that consciousness is spread out and it's shared among groups. Maybe that's working groups, maybe it's larger groups. And so you get into this hive mind. That's the only word to describe it, I guess. Do
Yeah.
you think that's possible in the future?
Yes, but I do want to point out, so in the Matrix, the brain was always in the jelly, right? It was
Yeah.
always in the person. You had experiences that were generated and shared like you're in a game with other people, but the mind was always in the body. And with the Borg, you didn't they described it as saying the hive mind, but what they really described technically was not that. It was more of an
Mm.
information superhighway.
Okay.
I equate how the Borg behaved. I mean, I don't want to get too nerdy, but there's episodes where one of the Borgs was like disconnected from the group and how they felt and all, and they tried to describe what that was like. But that what they were describing was the same feeling of a person who's maybe addicted to their phone and then loses their phone. They don't really lose part of their mind. Their mind is fully capable. They are still the idea of an individual is still there. Uh, but when they're connected, they lose that because they're just used to that ambient intimacy that always being connected with other people can bring. And so that idea that a Borg was a hive mind isn't really true. It's just more like an ultra connected. I mean,
Mm.
you could kind of equate them to a teenager today that's just like always on the phone because that is their connection. And so they do kind of lose their individualism, although we try to tout the idea that you can be yourself online or whatever, but you're tied into that whole environment and you cut that off, and there's like a real sense of loss, social loss, personal loss, but it's not a loss of mind, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea that your actual uh, brain function can be shared or intermixed with other people rather than a communication, because a communication is a clear barrier. Here is me down here, here is everything else, and I communicate what I want to, even if it's thoughts and high bandwidth communications and feelings, like we could be able to communicate feelings, which would be crazy, or like images that we hold in our heads without words. So there is a huge potential for changing fundamentally just how we communicate. But that still means that there's a barrier between me and my thoughts and my memories and what I want to communicate and how I'm communicating it with others. The big leap would be if we started to share neural spaces so that there is no idea of communication. There is just the idea of us, right? And again, the Borg tropes, they try to promote that idea that it's a hive mind, it's us, it's, whatever. But in every example of where they describe the technology, about how the Borg network works, how they interacted with the Borg that were cut off from their group, it just shows that they were doing really high-end communication and not actually sharing neural space. The idea that, Borg is an altered biological being, their mind is still in here, but they're just really
Mm.
connected. They never really broach the idea that when you are that connected and you're dealing with neural signals like action potentials of neurons itself, that part of the mind could actually migrate away from the biological framework that it's running on. And the level or the amount of that migration is, it's not deterministic. It could be anything, but in those cases, like it could be very, very serious. I mean, the Borg had the ultimate setup. They should have explored that because they had some kind of subspace, communication that was always on and never had a glitch. And, like that's what you would really need and want, because if you did start to explore this idea that a lot of your mind was actually, being processed outside of your brain matter, if you did have a miscommunication or disconnect, right? Um, you could really and quite literally lose cognitive function, right? Not just psychologically, but like actual cognitive function could be lost. And just like a brain injury, right? Where you have brain damage and it's like, okay, now your mind is collapsed into this biological thing. And and it has to learn how to deal with that and recuperate and reassign functions to other parts. And then maybe you get reconnected and you're like, oh my gosh, but there is a bizarre possibility, and this is far future, but if you were operating in that mode where you had some of your mind in here and some of your mind out there, whether that's on a device you have or in the cloud or both, if you had a disconnect and there was enough of a plasticity that your mind has grown equally in both spaces, is there now two of you? Is there a
Yeah.
mind that's digital, right? And what happens when you reconnect? Are you now getting to know yourself again? And that just touches on, I mean, I haven't really circled around yet, but the idea that you have this digital neural space, or even just connections to the biological brain, through a digital bridge. Um, if we wanted to then like do the Vulcan mind meld, we could really do it for real, because we could share neural spaces even if there was no. I mean, probably the first thing that some crazy people out there are going to try to do is connect brains together without a digital mind, but just bridge two brains together. So, Dr. Warwick, who did the first, I think in the 90s, he did the first, he was the idea to say, hey, microchip implant, let's put it in here. And he did that for a week, and that was a Cyborg 1.0 project. But a Cyborg 2.0 project was to take the terrible metal spiky arrays and jam them into a major, I think it was a radial nerve in his arm, and then his wife also got one, and then they linked them together, and they could feel the pulse, the impulses, and the neural activity from each other. Their brains didn't have enough time to plasticize and change and reinterpret that input as anything meaningful, but they could definitely feel it. And so that was kind of the first neurological mind meld, so to speak. But having these really high quality permanent bridges like Neuralink and Synchron, there's no reason we couldn't experiment with the idea of linking brains together in that way. It'd be really, really interesting.
Well, so again, just to kind of recap where we're at so far, we started with the Matrix. You've got VR experiences. We've gone to the Borg, where you're starting to move functions outside of the brain. I want to get into additive functions as well, which is something that I touched on in an interview about superorganisms the other day with author Byron Reese. Now, his focus was entirely on biological organisms. He's a beekeeper, and so I think that was his original inspiration. But he made an amazing point. For me, it was very paradigm shifting. He said, look, human beings are made of cells, and somehow we have this emergent consciousness that comes from that. He said, well, cities, countries, societies are made of people. What if something similar happens there? Now, what interested me, though, was his focus, and again, this goes back to beekeeping, I guess, as his inspiration was. He was looking at this entirely biologically. But the thing that immediately came to my mind was, we're not entirely biological, right? Like the internet is machines plus people. And so even without neural implants, I'm wondering if that might be going on, if what we think of as the singularity or the network waking up, maybe that's already happening. But I thought I would put that out there to see what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I don't think that in the same way an emergent consciousness will happen from the connectivity that we have or anything, but there are definitely emergent behaviors. There are emergent features. So if you go on Wikipedia, you could search just emergence, and it has these different contexts under that entry. And so, emergent consciousness is seemingly unique so far. There might be emergent consciousness coming in the digital space with different AIs and whatnot. But I think the idea that multiple conscious beings emerging into kind of a super consciousness, that depends on how you really want to define it, right? Because
Yeah.
if you're just observing, which everybody is doing, right? Right now, we don't have linked brains. We don't share a neural space. And so really, I just have to trust all the inputs that I'm observing and make a determination about that. So it's the Turing test, right? Can a computer pass as a human in a conversation? Well, we have that now, but does it make it a human? No. It's just that observation, is tricked, right? We're saying, okay, well, with the things that I'm seeing and the things I'm observing, this is a person, and that's just not true. So this, in the same way, I think we're going to be tricked a lot by AI that's coming down the pipe. But at some point, I think there may be an emergent consciousness that arises, but it won't be like ours. It'll look very similar, and it'll probably know how to pretend to be, but it will be its own thing. But as far as like the idea of merging humans together just in a communicative way, so just because of the internet, or just because even in the 1700s, because you had a very close-knit society where everybody knew everybody's business, and you all lived in this one little area for forever. That had an emergent thing, and we call that culture, right? So we have definitely emergent cultures from our proximity and our ability to communicate and the methods we use to communicate, the internet connecting us all together in ways that we never could before. So we definitely have emergent properties, which are culture, but when it comes to actually binding, neurological activity together, overlapping it, intermixing it, I think it's going to bring a whole new world of understanding on one hand. Like you really, we really can't do a good job today of truly communicating what it feels like to be yourself to another person. You're relying on that person having similar experiences that they can relate to. You're relying on your ability to collapse that down into something I can tell you about that you then reimagine in your head as a story that makes sense to you. But it's not my story. It's my story reimagined by you because you've imported it as input and now you've created it, reconstructed it. But for me to be able to say, here's my story, boop, and then literally put that in your mind because we're connected in that way, or we're sharing the space and we're thinking together. I don't even know how that would feel or work or whatever. That just is bizarre. And then you add multiple people to that, groups of thinking together minds where it's not communication, it's shared thought, and influence, just like the brain, every neuron in the brain is based on influence. This neuron is very important because we've had this thought before, and so all the connections of this one are very robust and carry the signal farther, and so and then it reconfigures. You can reconfigure your mind. It's dynamic. It's always changing. It's plastic, and so in the digital space, you would have individuals with shared space, and that would probably have a similar approach, I would think, where there's like influence that is always changing and depending, but you're thinking together, which is different from anything that's ever happened before. It's not communication. You're not saying, here's my idea, what do you think of it? Oh, and then you take their feedback back, and that's not what I'm talking. You literally would have a shared mind, which is, it might be terrible. It might cause psychosis, whatever. It might be great while it's happening, but then if you get dropped from that, you're like, a zombie. Who knows, right? It's just exciting to think about. But the reason that it's exciting to me is that it's totally plausible.
Yeah, well, and there is so much coming down the pipe, and it seems like these things are almost required for the future. I mean, I work with a lot of scientists, and one of the things that I'm seeing is the amount of work that has been done in the past, right? And this has been written about in terms of data. Human data just keeps increasing and increasing and increasing. And when you get into the sciences, it's the same thing with papers and observations and theories and hypotheses. It's becoming too much for any one person. And,
Right.
in some disciplines like physics, it's probably been that way for many, many years. But even in I would say less rigorous disciplines, it's becoming that way. And it will continue to increase. And so one of the problems becomes, when the amount of information that's required to make good decisions outpaces what anyone is capable of doing, we're almost going to have to use, like, for instance, ChatGPT is something that people are using for research a lot now. And
Mm-hmm.
I would assume that as things like that, continue to progress, that will go to implants and things like that as well.
Yeah, I think we're touching on, what Elon Musk has talked about, which is the only way for humans to compete is to integrate, right? And even if we're talking about, we're not, let's just omit the idea that we're going to share minds, right? Let's just go back to the basic idea that we can expand our cognitive capabilities as individuals with some technology like this. So there's one side, which is like, I need to be able to think harder, right? I need to be able to do things in the digital space in a digital mind that my biological mind isn't good at, like math or mass information consumption and processing, and I'm just acting as an individual doing that. So that's one approach that we could get to, which is just like, I'm a super brain when I'm connected, and I can parse all these papers and I can do all this stuff myself. Then there's the other side, which is much more likely, which is that I still do that. I still have like expansion of mind, but the focus is on directing AI agents that are acting on my behalf, and then I
Hmm.
task out things. So I'm like, hey, look at all these papers and figure out this thing. But the difference between doing that now with like a chat GPT and doing it in a mind space, right, is that when you're on a roll, like you're in the zone, you got flow, right? And things just seem to come supernatural and you're just like boom, boom. That could be the reality with independent agents that are doing these tasks, but doing it on a subconscious almost level. You don't have to command them to do it. You're just thinking like, and then you just like, okay, get those things. Yeah, okay. And it's kind of all coming together for you in a shared mental, digital mind space that is just, it feels like magic, right? Compared to how difficult it is to arrange all those things with your jelly brain, right? So I think that's probably a much more likely scenario. Before we get into I mean, I could see like maybe even regulation be like no mind sharing, right? Like that's a bad thing because I really don't see how that kind of concept could be maintained. It's like I would say there's probably a hard time um, making it such that doing that, sharing a mind space with other people, one or more people, over a long period of time could be good for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Particularly because the technology is not to the point where you can rely on it. Like if you had a failure of the network, right? Like AT&T went down, and thousands of people were out of cell service, couldn't call 911 or whatever. So that just happened last week. So, if we get to this point, and then I could imagine there being serious, impacts to society and individuals if these types of experiments start getting into the public space. Just like social media was an experiment, and there's all kinds of bad fallout from that because people are too engaged in it and they start to make their lives about that, and then there's problems. So, but on the other hand, I think humans are still going to try it. I think humans are still going to bumble down that road, and we'll see what the outcomes are. And maybe, there might be some capabilities that or new emergent cultures that come from that can handle it and can deal with it. And like the people that are of our generation, even the kids that are being born today might look at and go, "Ooh, that's creepy. There's kids today," like,
Yeah.
that's just how it works, So yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting though.
Yeah, yeah. Things continue to change, and it seems like we're continuing to blur the line between the natural and the artificial. And when I thought about this, when I was writing questions, I realized, we really haven't been natural for something like 2.6 million years since we started using tools. So it's not that we're leaving natural behind. It's just that we're continuing to change what it means to be natural, I
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, it's the height of arrogance to think that you're outside of the natural order, right? Like
Yeah.
this is the natural order because we're creating it as we go. Like there is no other order. This is natural. It just, the decisions that are made or the paths that different species go down could lead to extinction. Um, that's something that we are not, I wouldn't say unique. Other animals make decisions, and other animals do have cultures and things, but we are taking things to the nth degree, right? We're just like blasting off the surface of the planet into the unknown, and we're doing it very, very almost light speed at this point.
Well, Emil, thank you so much for your time today. We have given people a lot to think about, no pun intended. But,
Yeah.
I mean, we've gone through some mind blowing concepts, and so it's starting out with very rudimentary work in implants, and we're just saying this is where it could go, and there are going to be lots and lots of challenges along the way. Let me ask, what is coming up for you in 2024, as well as Dangerous Things in VivoKey? And do you have any predictions or prognostications for what we might see with Neuralink in the implant sector as well?
Oh man, so yeah, I mean, for me, our focus is on bringing more secure applications. We just started experimenting with legitimizing payment features and implants, although the networks like Mastercard, Visa, and whatnot, they're still very, very skeptical and don't really want to explore it. But we're making strides there, and we're talking to different companies now that want to bring different features to different government ID and patient ID and medical records solutions. So that's exciting. We're launching an IDP, which is an identity provider, so like a third party I'm getting very technical, but a third party like SAML-based SSO provider so that you can use your chip implant to log into enterprise applications like Okta, One Login, that kind of stuff. Being able to provide like Google Workspace accounts that you can log in with your chip implant. So if you go to a website that says log in with Google, you do that and then scan your chip and be able to log in that way, no password. So fun stuff like that, things that I want to use in my daily life. People have been asking about the payment thing. We're working on that. As far as like prognostications, I wouldn't dare. Like there's I never step into that space because you're always going to be wrong, right? Like it's just gonna there is this gap. I think if you go very far, like what we did today, then you probably have some level of accuracy because you're very broad in general. But to say, oh, the next 5 years, I think these things will happen. No idea. No idea. Always surprised every morning.
Thank you again so much for your time today, sir.
Sure.